The name of Alexander the Great is known to almost everyone, even those far from history books. He was a legendary figure who built one of the largest empires ever seen, conquered half the known world, and never lost a single battle. What makes his story even more incredible is that he achieved all of this in a remarkably short time. Alexander lived only 32 years. Born in 356 BC, Alexander was the son of King Philip II of Macedon. He came from a noble bloodline that traced its roots back to the mythical hero Hercules himself. At that time, Macedonia was a relatively weak kingdom, not known for significant military success. Nevertheless, Alexander's father placed a high priority on his son's education. Starting at the age of 7, he was tutored by the greatest minds of the era, including Lysimachus and the world-renowned philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle focused on disciplines essential for a future king: philosophy, diplomacy, and political science. He aimed for a comprehensive and balanced education, ensuring Alexander also studied the general sciences of the day. Alexander rarely saw his father. Instead, he spent most of his time with his mother, Olympias. Her upbringing left a deep mark on the future conqueror. According to contemporaries, she had a difficult character and often turned her son against his father, King Philip. Another key figure in shaping the future commander was Leonidas, a relative of Olympias. He was responsible for Alexander's physical and military training. Alexander was raised in harsh, almost Spartan conditions, being toughened from childhood for the struggles and hardships of life on campaign. Despite the discipline, Alexander maintained very warm feelings for Leonidas throughout his life. As with any legendary biography, there are many famous stories that historians debate to this day. Among the tales of his childhood, two stand out as the most fascinating. According to Plutarch, while still a child, Alexander once received Persian ambassadors in his father's absence. Despite his young age, he didn't ask typical children's questions. He asked about the nature of the Persian king's rule, the logistics and condition of Persian roads, and the true strength of their military forces. This intense dialogue with the young prince deeply astonished the Persian diplomats. The story of the horse. This legendary tale tells of how Alexander tamed an uncontrollable horse named Bucephalus, who would eventually become his lifelong companion. While all the grown men failed to handle the beast, young Alexander noticed something others missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. By simply turning the horse toward the sun, he managed to calm and master him. Watching this, King Philip reportedly cried out in pride, "My son, seek a kingdom worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you." Historians generally agree that Alexander's political career began in 342 BC. That year, King Philip officially named him his heir and left him in charge of Macedonia while he was away on military campaigns. During this time, a Thracian rebellion broke out. Alexander, who was only 16 years old at the time, successfully crushed the revolt, marking his very first victory. To commemorate this triumph, he founded a city in the Thracian lands and named it after himself, Alexandropolis. Alexander also proved his brilliance at the Battle of Chaeronea, where his unit launched a decisive attack that turned the tide of the battle in favor of the Macedonians. During this battle, he fought side by side with his father. However, despite their shared military success and Philip's recognition of Alexander as his legal heir, the relationship between them remained strained. The Macedonian nobility did not always look favorably upon Alexander, as he was not a pure Macedonian. His mother, Olympias, was from Epirus. Therefore, when King Philip divorced Olympias and married a pure-blooded Macedonian woman named Cleopatra, it created a serious threat to Alexander's succession. If a son were born from this marriage, he, rather than Alexander, would become the rightful heir to the throne, as the local elite would much more readily support a candidate of pure Macedonian blood. However, this did not come to pass. King Philip's life ended differently. He was assassinated by his own bodyguard during a wedding in Igi. There are theories that Alexander and his mother, Olympias, were involved in the murder, though there is no physical evidence to support this hypothesis. After his father's death, Alexander the Great ascended the throne, and the army that had fought alongside him immediately declared their full support. Immediately after his father's death, Alexander proved himself to be a formidable political leader. His first move was to use the king's assassination as a pretext to eliminate anyone who could threaten his reign. Philip's relatives, along with his wife Cleopatra and her daughter, were killed. In doing so, Alexander systematically removed every internal threat to his rule. Having dealt with his domestic enemies, he turned his attention outward. Philip had brought the Greek city-states under Macedonian control, though formally they remained independent. Seeing the king's death as an opportunity, the Greeks believed they were no longer bound to Macedonia, arguing that their treaty had been with Philip personally. In response, Alexander swiftly marched his army toward Greece and established a camp near Thebes. Stunned by the new king's lightning-fast reaction, the Greek leaders chose not to risk a military confrontation. They signed a new treaty, recognizing Alexander's authority and confirming his position as the hegemon of Hellas. Alexander began his first military campaigns as king with a preemptive strike against the Illyrians and Triballians, who were preparing to attack what they perceived as a weakened Macedonia. However, Alexander's sudden offensive shattered their plans. During this war, he demonstrated extraordinary talent as a commander, making rapid and brilliant decisions. He employed clever maneuvers, daring river crossings, and complex sieges. This strategic approach allowed him to defeat the Illyrians and secure their lands, marking his first successful campaign as king and ensuring the safety of his northern borders. There was another remarkable turn of events during this campaign. While Alexander was busy fighting the Illyrians, a rumor spread that he had been killed in battle. Believing these false reports, the Thebans and other Greeks ignited a rebellion, laying siege to Macedonian garrisons in the Greek city-states. As soon as he heard the news, Alexander marched south with incredible speed to personally lead the suppression of the revolt. The news that Alexander was actually alive caused many Greek cities to quickly abandon their plans, except for Thebes. Backed by his loyal Greek allies, Alexander took Thebes by storm. He gave the city over to his soldiers for plundering, resulting in a massive massacre. He then left the final fate of the rebellious city to be decided by the other Greek states. Their verdict was brutal. They voted to raze Thebes to the ground, sell its entire population into slavery, roughly 30,000 people, and divide its territory among themselves. The Greek world was shaken to its core by such an extreme and violent suppression. After the fall of Thebes, the Greeks' desire to defy Alexander vanished. It reached a point where Greek authorities began putting their own citizens on trial if they so much as called for another rebellion. After suppressing the Greek rebellion and completing his successful Illyrian campaign, Alexander began planning a massive invasion of Persia. The idea of such a campaign had long been popular among the Greeks. Through this expedition, Alexander hoped not only to win eternal glory and unite the Greeks behind a common cause, but also to solve his pressing financial problems. Following his decision to abolish certain taxes, Macedonia was heavily in debt. History would later call this the Eastern Campaign, and Alexander planned it with meticulous care, weighing every strength and weakness. He fully understood that while the Persian fleet was far superior to his own, the Macedonian infantry was unmatched. Consequently, his strategy was to move with incredible speed, forcing the enemy into decisive battles on land. The Persians were aided by Greek mercenaries who were well acquainted with Alexander's tactics. However, the Persian king, Darius, chose to ignore their advice. As a result, when the two forces finally met in their first major battle, Darius fled the field at the first sign of trouble. The casualty ratio was staggering, with Persian losses outnumbering the Macedonians by nearly 10-1. This dizzying success allowed Alexander to march deep into Persian territory, meeting only sporadic resistance along the way. Alexander's goal was to conquer as much territory as possible, so he continued his relentless march east. He focused on capturing coastal cities, systematically stripping the Persians of their naval advantage. In one of the ensuing battles, Alexander once again faced Darius head-on. Just as before, Darius fled the battlefield and his army followed in a panicked retreat. Alexander captured immense spoils of war, but his most significant prize was not gold. He managed to capture Darius's wife, son, 2 daughters, and mother. Surprisingly, he treated the royal captives with great respect and kindness. The next major milestone in Alexander's path was the siege of Tyre. Since the city was located on an island, it refused to surrender. Alexander took it by storm after a grueling siege. His revenge was brutal. He ordered all the surviving men to be crucified and sold the rest of the population into slavery. After this campaign, Alexander led his troops into Egypt. He met no resistance there. Instead, the people welcomed him as a liberator from the Persian yoke. He was immediately proclaimed Pharaoh of Egypt and bestowed with the divine title Son of Ra. In return, Alexander restored most of the privileges to the Egyptian nobility that had been stripped away by the Persians. With Egypt secured, Alexander made it clear to Darius that his ultimate goal was the total conquest of Persia. Darius gathered a massive new army for one final attempt to stop the Macedonian king. Despite having superior numbers, Darius once again fled the field at the Battle of Gaugamela, sealing his army's defeat. After this battle, Persian officials lost all faith in King Darius and began surrendering cities to Alexander almost without a fight. Along his path, Alexander amassed legendary wealth, finally filling the Macedonian treasury to the brim. The confrontation with Darius ended in a total victory for Alexander. He seized all Persian domains while King Darius himself was murdered by conspirators. Alexander's reaction to this event was remarkable. He branded Darius's killer, Bessus, a usurper, and vowed to avenge the fallen king. Furthermore, he not only allowed the officials who had remained loyal to Darius to keep their positions, but even rewarded them. Alexander then began to rule Persia as the King of Kings. This was a defining characteristic of Alexander's conquests. He never imposed his own religious beliefs or political systems on the defeated. Often, he left local officials in power, simply appointing his own overseers to work alongside them. By doing so, he minimized the number of rebellions against his rule. However, his deep adoption of Persian customs was met with resentment by his closest comrades. They were angered by his attempts to place the victors and the vanished on equal footing, and especially by his decision to allow Persians to be trained in the Macedonian infantry. With the conquest of Persia complete, Alexander sent part of the Greek army back home, declaring that the ancient dream of Hellas had been fulfilled. He announced that his next campaign would be his alone. After finishing the subjugation of Central Asia and the Near East, Alexander the Great turned his gaze toward India. The Indian campaign of Alexander the Great was the final chapter in his career as a brilliant commander. It began in 327 BC. Relying on the support of several local Indian rulers, Alexander launched his invasion. On his way to the heart of India, he conquered every tribe and nation in his path, many of whom surrendered without a single blow. After the start of the Indian campaign, the ruler of the Indus region submitted to Alexander, subsequently providing his army with war elephants, food, and livestock. As they moved deeper into India, Alexander's army captured approximately 37 cities, often meeting no serious resistance. The final point of the campaign was their arrival at the Ganges River. Alexander learned that beyond this river lay a wealthy country capable of fielding an army of about 200,000 men. By conquering it, he could have claimed the title of king of the entire known world. However, exhausted by years of constant marching and permanent warfare, his soldiers refused to go any further. They suffered from a climate they were not used to, strange food, and unfamiliar flora and fauna. By 326 BC, Alexander was finally convinced that the new campaign would have to be postponed. He made the difficult decision to turn back toward home. During the Indian campaign, as in his previous ones, he reacted harshly to any resistance. often killing all the warriors of defeated cities and selling the remaining inhabitants into slavery. After more than 10 years of continuous campaigning, Alexander the Great turned his attention to consolidating his empire. During his long absence, many of the governors he had left in power had begun to abuse their authority. Upon his return, Alexander acted decisively, removing them from their posts and executing those found guilty of corruption. To unify his vast domains, Alexander chose a dynastic approach. He organized the famous Susa weddings, a massive ceremony where approximately 10,000 Macedonians took brides from the Persian and Asian worlds. His closest inner circle followed suit, marrying women from the most noble Persian families. At the same time, Alexander accelerated the integration of his new subjects into the empire. He encouraged interracial marriages and recruited the youth of conquered nations into schools and the army, where they were trained according to the Macedonian model. This hyper-open integration policy sparked serious protests among the Macedonian populace and parts of the elite. Alexander suppressed these uprisings with his trademark ruthlessness. He continued to prepare for new military expeditions, building shipyards, expanding his fleet, and raising a massive new army. However, his grand plans were never to be realized. In 323 BC, at the age of 32, Alexander the Great suddenly died from a swift and devastating illness. To this day, historians debate whether his death was a result of natural disease or a calculated assassination by poisoning. Just 2 years after the death, who left behind neither an heir nor any clear instructions on who should rule, his empire began to crumble. The collapse of Alexander's empire was a logical outcome. While he was a courageous warrior, a brilliant commander, and a master strategist, he was not a statesman. Even in his childhood, his teachers, especially Aristotle, noted that young Alexander showed little interest in the disciplines of public administration. This lack of governance was further evidenced by his overtly populist decision to abolish taxes, which effectively forced him into massive military campaigns simply to refill the state treasury. Alexander ruled his empire by intuition, but his administrative actions almost never showed any signs of a long-term system. However, many of his methods, particularly his remarkable tolerance for local traditions, customs, and religions, were later adopted by other conquerors. This specific approach helped future leaders capture and control vast territories just as he had. Any empire is, first and foremost, a massive responsibility. The larger the territory under a single ruler's control, the more difficult it becomes to monitor and govern. Such vast domains can only be successfully managed by extraordinary individuals with rare statesmanship, and such rulers do not appear often in world history. Today, the world knows of no empire that has survived. All those known to us have long since fallen. History shows that, sooner or later, every empire led by rulers driven solely by conquest and expansion eventually collapses. However, it is impossible to give a definitive answer as to whether new mighty empires will emerge in the future. Who knows if our world awaits a new era of global upheaval, conquests, and legendary figures, or if we will move in a different direction, toward international cooperation and the strengthening of global institutions.